Here we have in a room the blockchain socialist.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. What's
Thanks for
going
having me.
on?
Nothing much. Just ready to talk about anarcho-syndicalism.
Do you have something to present, or is it more conversational? What's the vibe?
Yes, so I have a presentation with
All right.
some slides that hopefully I can get through all. So I think I need to just share my screen. It's here. Right.
Oh wow.
Is it working?
Yeah, you went full in on the aesthetics, huh?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay,
I got the date wrong, but yeah, it's fine.
no worries. Okay. With that out of the way, you can jump right in.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me. So yeah, today I'll be talking about DAOs and its connections to sort of lesser known political tendency called anarcho-syndicalism that was more popular in the earlier 1900s. Um, and in case you don't know me, I'm the blockchain socialist. I have a podcast and a blog where I talk about this type of stuff. It's very niche intersection of left politics and crypto, Web3, whatever you want to call it, blockchain world. I talk about these things. I have also have at the same time just quite a few other projects. So I have a sort of you can call it a DAO maybe, but we call it a cooperative called Breadchain Cooperative. Also filming a documentary about crypto, so you may have seen me in person around walking in the various conferences, ETH Lisbon, ETH Amsterdam. And I'm also writing a book about blockchain and the left with Repeater Books in the UK, which I haven't announced really in public, but I'm also doing that as well.
Excited for that one.
Yeah. And so this whole idea around DAOs and anarcho-syndicalism, it started with just a tweet that I made over a year ago. It now looks like where I was sort of noticing a bit of like this strange discourse going on with DAOs, where it was getting ironically very, very close to similar ideas that anarcho-syndicalism sort of advocates for, but it was through this like weird mix of, to be honest, in my opinion, a bit corporate jargon and sort of like internet slang mixed in. So it's a very strange thing. And I think, like at the same time, not really many people knew that much about anarcho-syndicalism. And so, after a little bit of time, I entered into the right race. It was called through Mirror, and I was voted in to be a member. Now you can do it for free, but back then you had to do the Mirror race. And I published my article called DAOs: Anarcho-Syndicalism in a Digital World. And so this is where I started exploring and sort of detailing out what are the connections between DAOs and this political tendency. And so what exactly is anarcho-syndicalism? So Noam Chomsky very quickly summarized it as basically a system where, or a federated decentralized system of free associations incorporating economic as well as other social institutions. And so that may sound like very abstract and very strange at first, but we'll go deeper into what that is. But whenever you're talking about anarcho-syndicalism, I think the most sort of interesting part about it to understand is sort of the history behind it and sort of real life movements that happened under the banner of anarcho-syndicalism. And so the most popular example was the Spanish Civil War, in which the country was sort of going through this change where they had had a monarchy for a very long time. People were getting fed up with it, and they were moving towards a republican form of government that basically reduced the power of the monarchy, and also a lot of people having this idea that maybe we could actually remove the monarchy itself as well. And so during this time, a republican government was formed. These were not, Republicans in terms of like, I don't know, your American Republican Party, or and neither Republicans were necessarily like socialists or communists or anything else like that. they tended to be maybe they could be considered liberal or something like that. But one of the more famous aspects of this period was then soon after a civil war started, where the conservatives or the nationalists, or really the fascists who were supported by fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, had started a campaign, a military campaign, to take back over the country and revert back to sort of like a, holding its conservative principles, and usually very religious and had a lot of power with the Catholic Church, and it was about bringing back the power of the monarchy. And one of the more famous people on the other side of this war, so the anti-fascist side of the war, which was sort of like a collection of different political camps. It included communists, it included Republicans, and it included the Anarcho-Syndicalists. And so part of the Anarcho-Syndicalist group was Buenaventura Durruti. And so he was a very famous guy. During this time, he had led his own sort of a regiment. So he had several hundred men under him and women who would go out and fight against the nationalists, against the fascists during the Spanish Civil War. And eventually, unfortunately, he died, and there was a very large funeral around his, there was a very large funeral in Barcelona. So it was particularly popular in Catalonia. And so what happened during this time, especially in Catalonia, called anarchist Catalonia, people took up arms. Everyone was sort of part of the fight. It was very much dominated by the anarchists, or the anarcho-syndicalists, which came out of sort of this coalition of unions, so the CNT FAI, in which the FAI was the more anarchist group of them. And so it's a really famous civil war. George Orwell fought in it famously. He wrote his Homage to Catalonia, which is a book before he wrote in 1984. Also, ironically, he was a socialist, although a lot of conservatives like to pull him out as, as quoting for fears about communism or something else like that. But he fought on the communist side of the war. And so also during this time, there was I think it was 75% of the workforce in Catalonia had been taken over by the workers. And so through the unions, which many people were a member of, they took over their places of work, where they expropriated the property essentially of the capitalists that had owned the factories and the businesses before, a lot of them, at least the bigger ones, and they had put it under worker control. And so cooperatives were like a really big aspect of this civil war, and sort of the vision of what they wanted the country of Spain, or at least Catalonia, to become. And so anarcho-syndicalism was created by this guy named Rudolf Rocker. He's a German philosopher. And basically, anarcho-syndicalism prioritizes building workers, unions, and going into direct action. So it's not about going through electoral politics in which you try to vote in your socialist or anarchist party. Instead, it's about going out there and trying to create the world that you want to live in through direct action, through unionism. And the point of that is to, from the base of worker unions, create federations of worker councils as the basis for a new society, while at the same time taking over entire industries. So you would have different federations of different types of industries that would sort of come together and form essentially a government through that. So it would prioritize the interests of workers and would be democratically governed through the unions and through this type of association of federations. And so by doing this, we're sort of prefiguring free association among individuals that are mediated through direct democracy, as opposed to the state or private ownership of means of production or any other forms of hierarchy. So it's very anti-hierarchical, and it prioritizes direct democracy, direct action, and unionism as part of its strategy for achieving political power. And so this really means, like, rather than working under a corporation, you are instead working in things that are like worker cooperatives. And so that's a little bit about what anarcho-syndicalism is. What I wanted to go into a bit to expand on this for Web3 and crypto people is to talk about a bit this sort of, let's say, conflict, although it's, in my opinion, a little bit of a fake conflict between social and technological solutions and relationships. So, because what you hear a lot is that, the people who are building, especially in crypto, are tending to prioritize only thinking about technological sort of solutions. But instead, what I want to show is how these things sort of interplay with each other. And so I think a really good example to sort of show that, especially in Web3 world, is a comparison between two different IT infrastructure models that I think most people are probably aware of. We have the client-server model, and we have the peer-to-peer model, which client servers, there's a centralized entity that holds the data, and then we have a peer-to-peer model in which everyone has access to the data and people can sort of freely ask each other for data itself. And so this technological structure has the ability to create new possibilities. So peer-to-peer network was a new one that was really pushed during the late 90s and early 2000s, especially in the launch of Napster. So we see whenever Napster was launched in 2000, we can see that there was a direct sort of material impact and social reconstruction of relationships through the creation of a peer-to-peer network. So we see that the music revenues have dropped since the launch of Napster and have never really been able to recover. We see that a lot of artists, for example, were affected in various ways. We see the reduction of the power of different labels and the rise of digital platforms to sort of compete with these peer-to-peer networks. So you see, if you really look at Spotify, you can sort of think of it as almost like a knockoff of Napster, since they used a lot of similar things. It provides the same type of service in the sense that you can listen to any music that you want, but instead you have to pay a little bit of a fee, and you have to you get a little bit of a better service or experience. And so when we're talking about from the technological standpoint, a lot of things that tends to be used as a cover for what the social implications are for technology is the word decentralization. This is especially true in crypto and blockchain world. And so funny enough, Vitalik Buterin actually he shared a pretty interesting framework for thinking about decentralization. Right, there's architectural, in which we're talking about how many computers is a system made up of. We're talking about political, so how many individuals actually control those computers that the system is made up of, and logical decentralization. So does the interface and the data structures look like a single thing or some sort of amorphous swarm? And so I think this is really important when we're talking about decentralization, because a lot of people tend to use it sort of amorphously without really thinking about what exactly it can mean. I think most of the time when people say decentralization in blockchain world, they're largely talking about architectural decentralization, whereas I think a lot of critics who will say that no, blockchain is not decentralized, they're talking probably more about political decentralization. But if we think about decentralization in a larger sort of perspective and using this framework, we can think of a lot of things in our lives and sort of plot them where they are. So on the most centralized, we have logically centralized, politically centralized, and architecturally centralized. We have traditional corporations, whereas something like the English language or BitTorrent are very, very decentralized. And then in the middle, we can sort of fit a few things. But we'll also see that blockchains sort of reside and are logically centralized, but are architecturally and politically decentralized. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Blockchains use a very concrete data standard for the protocol in order to be able to communicate with each other in the network. But architecturally, they're definitely decentralized usually, and politically, it can vary from blockchain to blockchain probably. And so I really want to hone in on this idea of centralization, but especially in terms of our workplaces, and to sort of convey this idea, understanding that most of our workplaces are actually essentially dictatorships. They are essentially monarchies in certain senses. So if we look at sort of the organizational structure of corporations versus cooperatives, we can see that there's a very big difference. Of course, traditional corporations, this is easy. They're basically a pyramid where the owners at the top and those who are the general laborers at the bottom. And there is, of course, like a stratification of class within the corporation, but usually this is a way to sort of uphold the structure itself. Whereas cooperatives tend to be much more free-flowing, they tend to be more horizontal in certain ways and only allow sort of hierarchies when necessary. And this has a lot of implications for technologies. So a lot of technology is created with the traditional corporation in mind, because that's who they want to sell to. Those are their clients, right? But cooperatives, because they have different social relationships, they need different technical tools. And so one example of this, for example, would be Lumio. So Lumio is a type of software or platform where it is able to facilitate democratic deliberation. So you can vote on different things. This is well before DAOs were ever a thing. This is, before you had token voting. Each person has, one vote, or depending on how you set up the settings inside of it. But so I think, it's just important to keep in mind that a lot of software is built with the social relationships of corporations in mind. And that's something that is sort of problematic, especially when we're thinking about decentralization. If we advocate for decentralization in crypto and blockchain world, we need to be thinking of decentralization also in the workplace. And so that means that the tools that we're building need to fit those social relationships. They need to facilitate those social relationships. And so we can see that by facilitating, or by just having these sorts of social relationships, they create also, concrete material consequences. So we can see, for example, the usual wage inequality in the US and the EU, 129 or 339 to 1 from CEO to line worker. Whereas in cooperatives, at least in the Mondragon cooperative, they only have a limit of 6 to 1 or 9 to 1 type of wage inequality. So there's a very, very big difference in wage inequality whenever you have democratic accountability built into your organization. And so this is just to say that the cooperative model is a proven one. It's one of a lot of different cooperatives exist that you don't even really know are cooperatives. Some are better than others. Some are focused on workers being the owner of the company, or there are the producers, or they are the retailers, or in the case of Swift, for example, it is a cooperative of banks around the world. So it is a model that actually works, even if there is democratic accountability. Because I think sometimes people sort of assume that because there's this democratic aspect to it, there's sort of this fear that it would slow down progress or slow down the speed at which a business or company is able to react or something like that. And then we see, of course, nowadays, this sort of burgeoning platform cooperative movements where you see basically people trying to create cooperative versions of already existing centralized tech platforms like Uber and Airbnb. We have the Drivers Cooperative or Fairbnb. And so my thesis, or my theory of, why I think DAOs are really interesting to people, why it's been, people have sort of like clung on to it, is because I think that the concept of DAOs represent the potential to decentralize one of the most centralized aspects of most people's lives, which is their workplace. Most people work in a centralized organizations. They don't have much say in their work. They don't have any democratic input. And I think a decentralized organization is very appealing to people because we very seldom are able to express ourselves in democratic ways in the place that we spend, 40 hours a week, depending on what you do for work. And I think that's something that people really like. And that's why, a lot of people are into it. And that's why I think there is a lot of very clear connections with something like anarcho-syndicalism or with unionism in general, where the whole purpose of the political movement is to decentralize the workplace, and through that sort of create a more decentralized and democratic society and government through that. And so just to conclude, this is, we cannot cleanly separate social and technological relations. You cannot create technological tools and just suppose that, the world will just continue as it is without any social consequences. We need to be careful and think deeply about these tools that we're building and the type of social relationships that we're trying to build. And so when we're thinking about, the Web3 stack or the Web3 protocol versus, how Web 2 or centralized tech platforms usually function, the technological infrastructure of that facilitates new possibilities for new social relationships. And so I think that's just really important to keep in mind for you builders out there. Thinking about the good things that you can do with it, but also the bad things, and like the type of social relationships that you're building, and whether it's something that sort of aligns with what you would like to see in the world. So I think there is this legitimate fear of people and of mine as well, that people tend to use the word decentralization very frivolously whenever the outcomes of sort of the things that they're building may not necessarily be as decentralized as they think. But you do see some like pretty interesting sort of proto-cooperative behavior in the crypto world. So we saw Uniswap do their token drop based on use of the platform. This is sort of very similar to the way that producer cooperatives generally work, or grocery cooperatives or things like that. So the more that you use something, the bigger payout of profit sharing that you would get. We see multi-signature wallets that are growing that have built-in democratic accountability, and we see things like funny collective ownership of NFTs through Party DAO, for example. So I think there is this sort of desire of people to be able to collectively work together, and that we cannot simply look at these things through a lens of libertarianism and like individualism, because I mean, first of all, that's not the only thing you can do with it. So people are going to collectivize anyways, and it's important to try to think about like the type of collectivization that we want to do. And so, what does this mean for the future of what we're trying to build? If I want to give you some recommendations on things to think about. So 3 things. One, I think, is exit to community is a really interesting idea. Would implore everyone to sort of look up what that is. It's an idea shared by Nathan Schneider, who is an academic who focuses on cooperatives, and he proposes sort of this third way of being able to sort of sell your business rather than sort of going through an IPO or doing a corporate acquisition. You can do an exit to community in which you give your platform, especially this is especially useful for tech, to sell their platform to the people that actually use it and their workers. We have things like, of course, quadratic funding, which I think limits the power of capital in certain ways. So I think trying to find these types of, in quadratic voting as well, trying to find these things that more easily makes it able to express different democratic opinions, and also limiting the power of capital. And then it also looks like the industrial workers of the world, I think. So the IWW is an anarcho-syndicalist inspired institution, which is basically a union for everybody to join. It's sort of like a DAO for unions in certain ways, not necessarily on a blockchain type of DAO, but it is a decentralized type of organization that would implore people to also look into, I just think is really, really interesting. And so, yeah, so this is, I'm working on Bread Chain, which is just sort of like this project. It's a cooperative sort of exploring some of these ideas that I'm talking about. So these are the couple of other DAOs or projects that are under the sort of Bread Chain network. And yeah, thanks. If you want to learn more, I have a podcast, like I said, I have a blog. If you want to watch the teaser for the documentary that I made, so you go to @_cryptofutures. And you can follow me on Twitter @TB Socialist.
All right. Definitely go follow the Blockchain Socialist podcast. Is top notch, is very good quality. You will hear very interesting conversations. So and whoa, like this
Where do we start?
I would like yeah, you've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I was worried I wasn't going to get through it all, to be honest.
You did a good job, actually. So nice. And I really like that you situated this, the political philosophy of anarcho-syndicalism historically, because the history of it is very interesting, also with CNT, Phi, and the whole fight against Franco's fascism. So it's people should all, go check that out.
We should add that unfortunately the fascists won that war, and Spain was under a fascist dictatorship for some 60 years or something like that. So yeah, so they're still probably recovering from that a bit.
All right, Pete, do you have any commentary, anything to say?
Not really. Just always enjoy listening to Josh on the podcast recently. Always a lot of fun. Always great talk. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Let's see. Today's a little bit quiet. I don't see anything. And let me do something cool. Let's see if that works. Oh no, it's inverted. No. Did that work? Technology.
Ooh.
Yeah, don't see anything there. So I got like not actually a question, but did you watch like Richard Wolff's interview on Lex Friedman, the blockchain socialist? Trying not to dox you.
No, I don't think so.
It's very interesting because he touched on this specific issue of the that democracy has infiltrated every aspect of our life except the most important one for our livelihoods, like the workplace.
Yeah.
And I saw that. So I got here already peeled. And I was like, yeah, that's very true. And it is very interesting that we don't acknowledge that, and we think that it is normalized to live in this dictatorial environment while you work. So it is very interesting to bring these ideas to the fore and to actually try to democratize it. And it seems like people have been actually talking about this, but the imagination behind it and the tools weren't there. But yeah, it seems like now we could actually pull it off. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, I think it's so like it's been interesting for me to see the original idea of DAOs, which were DACs, like autonomous corporations at first, which came from a very libertarian point of view about work, in which there was sort of like a high prioritization about automation of everything, to where an entire business is able to make money and profit without me needing to lift a finger using smart contracts. And I think a lot of people had this ideal in the beginning, but it was pretty interesting seeing a lot of the analogies that people would use would be like, okay, what if we made Uber, but except without the Uber, and the drivers can control things. And I remember during that time thinking like, well, you're just describing a cooperative, maybe facilitated through smart contracts or something like that. So I think that there is this sort of like, there's this really weird thing happening where there's, a little seed of almost like socialism in a lot of these ideas that people don't really want to admit or want to like really bring up. I think I don't think they just don't like really think about it that way. And so I think, if we sort of push to make sure that the DAO tooling that we're making and the like expectations of all of these different tools and what a DAO actually is, and for it to be something that is democratic, then we can sort of, begin to really answer for the things that we feel is lost in our lives, usually at centralized corporations. I think if we're going to spend so much time doing this thing, why should we not have democratic input into that?
Yeah, and what's very interesting is that in this whole DAO space thing, the guilt around these labels, calling yourself socialist, is starting to wane off. Not that much, but it's still because people are talking about community ownership and collective ownership. People are talking
Mhm.
about a very different way of approaching labor and value. So it seems like we're getting there to actually set this like a civil war type of mentality.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's eventually, I think a lot of these people will be really interested in like maybe like Karl Marx or someone like that. We'll
It's
see.
not bad.
Not yeah. You
It's
guys,
not
it's not
gonna
the
break. Yeah.
yeah, it's not the this isn't the first time people have been thinking about collective ownership, for sure.
Yeah, you can have like Hayek on the one hand and Marx on the other. You can try to do all kinds of things. It's doable. It's, um, also, it seems like we got Brent in the room, although Brent, I think you're in an hour from now. So I got to let you know that's the case.
Yeah, we're waiting for Awaki.
Yeah, we're waiting for Kevin
He
Awaki
wrote
right
you
now.
soon, 10 minutes ago.
But he was still waiting. We can keep on the discussion, I think.
Sure.
So, and I don't know how much time we'll have with that. Like, every issue that we can open up will probably spawn up like a huge discussion. These are not like, this is not fast food type.
Yeah. Sorry.
Discourse. But we have the panel afterwards.
Yeah, which I think would be interesting to talk to the others about that. Because yeah, I think that if I were to continue my sort of observations, maybe, and that I make in the article is that a lot of crypto has, well, not maybe not a lot, but there is a faction, a part of crypto that is I would characterize as sort of like apolitical do-gooderism. So I think a lot of people are afraid of politics or like afraid of sort of thinking about politics or expressing politics in a particular way. And so they sort of try to be apolitical while also being like, I'm doing good for the world at the same time. So sort of like this, yeah, I don't mean to be too mean, but like sort of a pseudo progressivism that I think we just need to be careful about. And we need to sort of, in my opinion, I don't think that we can really ever get away from politics. We can't really just ignore it. We have to sort of embrace the political nature of the thing that we're doing, especially when it comes to crypto world, when it comes to DAOs. Like, if you're wanting to have this big of a change, especially if you want to have a big change in a positive direction, in my opinion, there's going to be a lot of pushback from, the different institutions and powers that be.
Yeah, definitely. Like the whole, I wouldn't blame people for not being political because there are people who have maybe too much to lose.
Sure,
Sometimes
yeah.
maybe have not experienced directly the struggles of working class people. Maybe have not been exposed to that. And so I wouldn't blame people for that.
Sure, it's not a blame.
But yeah. Of course, in the way you phrase it, doesn't it's not a blame, but it is something that happens.
Yeah.
And it seems like what is especially here in the Web3 crypto world, what we do seems like it is inescapably political in its roots. So at least here, it is very hard to escape it, but there is a tendency, like a momentum towards escape from that. But still, we get maybe there is an issue of fear of the political. I don't know. It's something that's very deep.
Yeah, well, maybe we can discuss it more in the panel.
Yep.
I think Waki's here.
Yeah.